All right, so we did a lot of work, right? We've created a page that has a placeholder for us to display our data, right? Then we created an object that this page is going to use in order to create the rows that it wants to represent its checklist, right? And in that checklist, we created a row object that's actually responsible for manipulating the DOM to add the actual checklist elements that we want, all right? And then we added a function to the prototype for the checklist that allows us to use that row code to actually append the element to the page. Well, what's next? So now we have two things. We got our page, right, that displays something. We got our code that's going to do it. But we always need to tie the two together, right? And what do we say is the glue that binds, right? The glue that binds are the events. When some event occurs, we want to somehow call this function. All right, so as we've been doing before, we need to actually do two things here. First, we need to include that script on our page to make it available, right? But we've been using main to represent basically the main function of a program like we did in any other class, all right? So we need to set main up to use our checklist selector, all right? So here, we know that our checklist selector is our data coffee order equals checklist. So that's our placeholder back on our main page, right? Where is it? Right here, right? So we create a constant in main to give us access to that, all right? Why in main? Because that's where we're going to instantiate our checklist objects. Remember, we instantiated all our modules here, all right? So let's take a look at it. All right, so we've seen all this already. There's our app for our window. There's our truck module. There's us creating a data store. Form handler we really didn't go over, but we read that chapter, so you should understand that as well. Now, we're grabbing our checklist module and creating a variable to store that. All right. So once we create a truck, we're going to create a checklist. Well, what did we say checklist took in this constructor? Let's go back and look at it. Well, it took the selector that we're going to be appending the checklist to. All right. So that means that when we create an instance of it, we need to give it that selector, right? All right. So what do? We give it this constant checklist selector. Well, what does that checklist selector point to? It points to that. And what is that? Well, that is our placeholder back in our form. So the element we want to append our new checklist elements to is this empty placeholder right here. All right. Now, we've created our instance of our checklist object. Now we need to set it up so it responds to events. Well, what event does it need to respond to? All right. Well, it wants to respond to a truck trying to deliver an order. All right. Well, let's look at how it does that. Let's go to the add click handler and let's study the add click handler real quick. All right. So we're going to go over here to checklist and let's look at the add click handler. All right. So it takes, let's look at the function. All right. It takes another function. Whoa, takes another function? Well, we've seen this before. We've passed functions around. We did it in Core.js as well. All right. So let's see what this does. We call that a callback function, right? Remember that? Callback functions. All right. So what are we going to do? We're going to set a click handler up, right? So what are we setting the click handler on? Well, we want to set the click handler on the checkboxes. All right. So this dot element dot on. All right, so now we're using the on to set our event. So slightly different syntax, but this on allows us to create events on objects. All right, and this is because this is a jQuery element, right? So that's why we include the jQuery element. But we can actually do this the normal way we created events, all right, by setting up a click event for it. So we're just using a slightly different syntax here. So what event are we listening to? We're listening for the click event. The click event on what? On any input element. Well, what input elements would we have click events on? Oh man, those check boxes, right? So we're listening for the click event on any input element that we receive. Well, the only input elements that would have a click event would be those checkboxes that are on our page, right? Now, what do we want to do? This is that third argument. What do we want to do when that click event occurs. Remember, this is our function that we assign, our event handler, right? We could create a function right? We could do that, right? And then that third element would be that, right? Handle event. All right, so this is just jQuery. Right, we'll take this out. Right, this is just using different syntax for creating an event, but you can use the syntax we already know, or you can use this syntax. All right. All right, so let's look at it again. All right, so this is our function that's going to handle the click event. All right, so what does it do? Well, I need to know the order that you want me to do something with. Well, how do we know the order? Well, the event that's passed in is going to contain the element, right, that is the target, or the element that was clicked. So the thing that's always going to be in the event, if you include the event in the callback, the thing that's always going to be in the event is the event object, right? That event object, the event that occurred, right? That event object is going to contain a target property. That target property is going to contain the element that was clicked or submitted or whatever, right? And its value property is what we want to access. Well, what is in the input element's value property? Well, to know that, let's look at checklist. We set it, we created it. What did we give it? Ooh, the email address is the value. So the email address representing the order. All right, so all we're doing here, where were we? All we're doing here is getting the email that the checkbox was associated with. Now, the only thing we're adding this add click handler. Why? Because when they click on the checkbox, we should remove that order, right? So we need to get the name of the order that we want to remove. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to call the remove row function and pass it that email. Now let's take a look at remove row. What does remove row do? Well, remove row is a function that takes an email. What does it do? It finds the element. All right, so this is jQuery syntax again. jQuery has a .find. All right. Well, the equivalent that we've studied is document.getElement by ID, right? Or, but this is easier because now we can find something by an HTML value. All right. So we're finding it. Find the element whose value attribute equals that email. So it would find the DOM element, the input box, that's checkbox, whose value corresponds to this email. And what do we want to do with it? We want to find the closest element. All right. Closest element is going to be the closest element with this attribute. So find the checkbox whose value equals that, and now remove it from the DOM. So that just removed that entire row or that DOM element from our checklist. Just that simple by using the jQuery syntax. All right. Study that. Now that we've removed the row, that was just the page level. We removed the row from the page. Cool. But we have real world logic. Well, what in the real world happens, right? Because we build an application for the real world. So you have a page that does stuff, right? But what in the real world occurs? So this says, when I remove a row, I want you to execute this function now with the email. Well, what is this function? Well, this is the function that was passed in from the code that's using this. Well, what code did it pass in? Well, let's go back to main to see. Oh, it passed in the deliver order function for the truck, right? So what happens then is this truck object's deliver order function is going to get executed at that point. Well, what is deliver order? Oh, it just displays an element. It displays a line on the page that says it delivered the order for that customer. And then it removes that object from the DB. So again, that's a callback function. This, our add click handler, should not be responsible for removing a row. But should not be responsible for removing something from the database because it is only responsible for moving something on the page. But we want that to occur when this occurs. So what we're going to do is tell it, hey, when you're finished doing what you do, execute this for me as well. So that deliver order will only get called after we've removed an element from the page. Then it will get called or executed. All right. All right. We will be back. Take care.